Another stupid distraction or a stroke of bloody genius? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, President Trump upset the apple cart again on Monday morning tax day when most people are scrambling to fill out their federal returns. The president decided that he would tweet out the following message, and I want to read it word for word here. Those illegal immigrants who can no longer be legally held, and then in parentheses, he said Congress must fix the laws and loopholes, will be subject to Homeland Security, given to sanctuary cities and states. Now, Bill, of course, in the last couple of days, this has sparked an uproar about the president's authority, about his negotiating tactics, about his lack of presidential decorum. But when you first heard about this, Bill, what was your reaction?
Bloody genius.
And why is that?
Because he has he has the courage and certainly the cunning to see how hypocritical the entire sanctuary cities idea is, how unbelievably hypocritical it is. I think he should just drop them off inside the boundaries of San Francisco and scatter them all over the country inside the boundaries of sanctuary cities. Just drive to downtown, open the doors, and say, "Well, we can't touch you here, so as long as you stay within the bounds of this city limits, we can't do anything." Now, first of all, I don't believe that we can't do anything. I don't think that a city has a right to declare itself independent and sovereign of of U.S. federal law. I think the whole idea is ridiculous. But what it does, and it does brilliantly, and this is precisely the kind of thing we should be doing all the time, is it makes the progressives live up to the virtue signaling lies that come out of their mouth all the time. I saw very recently, I don't know how old it is in terms of when it was shot, I suspect it was recent, but it was an interview with people on the streets, I think in Germany, and everybody there's a big liberal, of course, and there was a Muslim man with a beard, Muslim-looking man certainly, with a beard, and he interviews 7 or 8 people. How do you feel about taking in illegal immigrants and refugees? I'm 100% for it. I love it. I think it's great. We should open our doors to them. We should open our arms to them. 5, 6, 7, 8 of these people putting themselves down on record on how much they love this idea. And then he said, "Oh, well, terrific. This is Mohammed, my nephew." And Mohammed walks in, he's got a beard, and says he has no place to stay, so presumably he can stay with you. We just don't have very much room where I am. I live in a very small apartment. Nine or 10 of these excuses and backpedaling, which is as crystal clear an example of what is going on as you could possibly get. In other words, it is virtue signaling and not virtue. If you were willing to take in strangers from a war-torn country and take them into your home and feed them and clothe them and be responsible for them, I would consider that to be a virtue. I'm not sure I would consider it to be a wise decision, but I would certainly call that a virtuous decision. But when you say you're in favor of something that you're dead set opposed to, it's just an outright lie. And it's the same thing with the wall issue, Scott. You know, if Nancy Pelosi and all of these movie stars really genuinely think that walls are artificial and borders are artificial and there are no illegal people and so on, that's great. Then we can have them sleeping in your yard and coming into your house for some cereal in the morning or maybe to use the toilets or something like that. In other words, if you want to open the gates of the country, open the gates of your house. Open the gates of where you live. Don't force the common people, the hoi polloi, and the vast unwashed savages out in America whose only function in life is to pay taxes. Don't force them to a behavior that you're not willing to agree to yourself.
Well, Leslie Marshall, writing on the Fox News website, says that some mayors have begun to say that they would welcome the asylum seekers. But in fairness, Bill, the initial reaction was anger at the president and allegations that what he was doing was a form of retribution, especially since it's been suggested hang on a second, that some of those that refugees, so-called, or migrants would be sent to Nancy Pelosi's home district and the Democrats were saying this is a form of retribution. So the question flows from what you just said. Why would it be considered retribution to send people that are considered to be virtuous and just needing help?
Precisely. How can how can you possibly be upset about this? You've declared that your city is a shining beacon of liberal values in this great racist sea of America. So you should not only be welcoming this, you should be preparing the ticker tape parades down the center of every single one of these towns. And you should be out there, you should be warming up the welcome wagon and just as happy as you can be. You miserable, low-life, lying, hypocritical bastards. This is why it's so brilliant. It's so brilliant, and why everything that Donald Trump does with regard to this progressive ideology is so brilliant, and why they hate him so much. Because he understands the lie that's behind everything, and then he understands that the best way to deal with the left is to give them what they want, what they say they want.
Now,
because it's not what they want.
Because the president himself does not believe that there is no danger involved in sending a whole bunch of these so-called asylum seekers into these cities, doesn't the president's threat to do so represent an abdication of his role as commander-in-chief to keep Americans safe? You
can't have it both ways. In fact, when you said that he had said that we were going to do it subject to Homeland Security review, my first thought was why? Why do we have to do the Homeland Security review before we determine these people to be relatively safe? No one determined whether they were relatively safe when they came across the border illegally. We didn't have a chance for Homeland Security to take a look at them before they got into our country and afoul of our legal system. So why should it be the federal government's responsibility to put these people through background check and so on? That should be the responsibility of San Francisco. If San Francisco wants to secede from the Union, as far as federal law goes concerning its territory, its defense, and all the rest of it, then they can handle this burden on their own. And I think that when immigration drops these people off in San Francisco, I think they need to make it abundantly clear, the federal government, that this sanctuary city protects you to the borders of the city of San Francisco. You step 1 foot outside of that border and you're going to be arrested and deported. And then they'll realize, well, I guess we'd better stay here. And we'll just keep shipping them in. And what's going to happen, Scott, what's going to happen is the same thing that happened in San Francisco with the homeless people. When San Francisco and Santa Monica, which is just down the street from me, decided to thump their chests and tell everybody in the world how unbelievably virtuous we rich liberals are. We want homeless people to feel welcome here in Santa Monica, which I'm more familiar with. So they came, and 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 they defecated on the streets like they're doing in San Francisco now. And then all of a sudden, the people of Santa Monica just very quietly they said to the police force, you got to get these homeless people out of here. They're ruining my yard. So make them live up to their own standards. I think it's the most brilliant thing I've seen him do since he put Bill Clinton's rape victims in front row of debate number 2.
Well, as you said earlier, you can't have it both ways, Bill. Either you say that sanctuary cities do not have a right to declare themselves as such because of our constitutional federal government, which has jurisdiction over areas involving immigration, or not, because you can't say, well, let's just, because it's a political stunt that may win us the negotiation, let's pretend that we are going to abide by this sanctuary city, what do you want to call that? The delusion, the pulling out from the Union with regard to that aspect of the Constitution. How can you have it both ways if you don't want to allow them to have it both ways?
I'm not having it both ways. My position on this is very clear, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I do not understand how this debate has been allowed to go on, not only this long, but at all. Period. At all. This should be a federal ruling, should be backed up by the Supreme Court, and make it crystal clear to these mayors that you do not have the authority to withdraw your city from the United States of America. You do not have that power. That's my position. I maintain that's my position. And if that was what was happening, then I would say we wouldn't have an issue here, because there wouldn't be any sanctuary cities, and the federal government would do one of the few things that the federal government is actually intended to do, and that is protect the borders of the United States of America. But that's not the world we live in. And if we're going to live in a world where mayors and governors can declare themselves independent of U.S. federal law and get away with it, well then, okay, if that's the rules that we're going to play by, then we'll play by those rules. If you're not going to play by the rules, if you want to make your own rules, then we'll play by your rules and see how you like it.
Now, President Trump has been accused by progressives and the left of essentially being a dictator or aspiring to be a dictator, of seeking greater power than the executive office really has. And so I find it curious when you actually read the full context of this tweet that there are three statements, and I'll repeat them, three statements of the rule of law, followed by the statement that we're going to give these illegal immigrants to the sanctuary cities and states. Number one, illegal immigrants who can no longer be legally held. So President Trump is saying we can't hold people longer than federal law allows. Number two, Congress must fix the laws and close the loopholes. So he's saying the legislative branch has the authority and the responsibility to do that. And number three, subject to Homeland Security. So he's saying the Homeland Security Department has jurisdiction over that area. So there were three statements enforcing the rule of law, and this one statement saying we're going to give them to the sanctuary cities. Bill, why do you think that last part of the phrase was more appealing than the rest?
What, you mean the Homeland Security phrase?
No, the part where it says we're going to give them to the sanctuary cities.
Okay, look, first of all, I think the president is mistaken when he says there needs to be legislation for this. I think there's already legislation for this. Legislation is the United States Constitution. I think this should never have been allowed to happen, and I don't think this is a question for Congress. This is a question for the Supreme Court. One of the legitimate questions for the Supreme Court is to affirm that a city that is inside the sovereign boundaries of the United States of America is subject to the federal rules of the United States of America. And if we decided that somehow or another San Francisco had been a place that decided to abolish your First Amendment and Fifth Amendment rights, as effectively as they've abolished your Second Amendment rights, we'd never hear the end of the squealing. So what I find interesting about this is it's interesting that they call Donald Trump a dictator, because according to their standards, he's a liberator. He is actually sending people to freedom in the most virtuous places of America. How can you call him a dictator? He'd be a cruel man if he sent them back to Mexico or wherever they came from. He's actually liberating them to live in America underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, where all people are equal and everyone is welcome. So there's that. And secondly, by saying that he's going to do the Homeland Security review anyway, what he's basically saying is, despite the fact that we shouldn't be having this discussion, but if we are going to have this discussion, and if you are a sanctuary city, we should just be able to simply open the doors of the bus and out you go. He's taking the additional step, which is exceedingly generous in my opinion, and also smart. He's taking the step of saying we are going to do our best to make sure that the worst of these murderers, I'm not saying they're all murderers, I'm saying that the worst of the people who have criminal records, the federal government will, as a favor to you, take care of this initial security screening before we make you live up to your own stated standards. This is precisely what the left does. They make these highfalutin, very, very big and bold sounding things about this, and then they do exactly the same thing on the other side. They talk about how we should raise taxes. They tell their accountants to lower their taxes. They talk about how public schools should be inviolate. They send their kids to private schools. It never ends, Scott, ever. It never ends. And this is the only way to defeat the left, is by making them suffer the consequences of the policies that they are advocating. So if you're a rich liberal and you say we should raise taxes, then we want to make sure that you are paying every single tax that you're entitled to, and that you're not taking any deductions, or certainly no serious deductions, because to take a tax deduction when you're in favor of high taxes seems a bit hypocritical to me, and also a bit above the pay grade of most of the Americans in this country who are trying to hold on to the money that they make. So I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I don't think it's brilliant from a political ploy point of view. I think those buses should start unloading people today.
So, final question, Bill. Because Congress is responsible constitutionally for establishing a uniform law regarding immigration and naturalization, why is it not the case that Republicans are driving the immigration reform movement, and President Trump using his bully pulpit, and by the way, for those young people in the audience, bully, as Theodore Roosevelt used it, meant an excellent pulpit, an opportunity to send a message out, not something where somebody gets hurt who's a wicked party.
Better explain to young people what a pulpit is too.
Well, I might have to do that as well later. That's a whole episode. So given the fact that Congress is responsible for establishing this uniform rule of naturalization and immigration, why don't Republicans take up that mantle and be the driving force behind doing this, with President Trump providing the wind at their back?
Because, Scott, because we seem to be incapable of any of the stuff that we've done 145 episodes of on this show. They seem to be absolutely, utterly incapable of getting to the root of the problem as a moral issue and not as a political issue. And then they seem to be absolutely physically and psychologically incapable of stating the obvious. And why they don't do it, I don't know. As I said a few times during this segment, this discussion should have never arisen in the first place. The whole thing is completely illegal. It's sedition, and there's no question about it. But we put up with it because we don't want to be called racist, because we don't want people to illegally enter into our living space without our permission and without us knowing anything about them, and without any assurance that they're here for the good of the household. You know, in many cases, proven fact that they're here to destroy the household. So why this is going on in the first place eludes me, but certainly I have not heard any high-level politician just come out and simply say, this is illegal. It's illegal, and I'm not going to allow it. But the consequences of allowing it, if I were to allow it, would be to say that, well, if San Francisco, for example, is a sanctuary city, then San Francisco is no longer under the protection of the United States military under any forms. And we will set up passport stations and border controls and decide whether or not we want to grant San Francisco most favored nation status. And this is what you do when you can't win the primary argument, is you win the argument on their grounds, but we should never have put it in their grounds. Should have stayed on our ground, which is the high ground, and it's the high ground of the law. And it's not just law, it's common sense. And by pointing out the hypocrisy of this, Donald Trump has brilliantly shown what a bunch of liars and hypocrites these people are, and how they're doing all of this cynically to get political power. And it's a stroke of genius. And once again, I think his chances of getting reelected went even higher.
Ladies and gentlemen, like these United States of America, Bill Whittle's enterprise here is a welcoming enterprise. We invite countless thousands of people to enjoy these videos on YouTube. You can even click a little reminder bell that will send you an email when we post a new video. We've had a lot more people become subscribers to the YouTube channel recently, and we have a growing number of people who have taken that next step. And let's just call that Bill Whittle's citizenship. The next step is to become a member at BillWhittle.com, where you can enjoy unfettered access and complete rights of membership at BillWhittle.com. Not just watching the videos on YouTube like the hoi polloi and the unwashed masses, but actually being invited into the fold behind the wall, let's say, where you can have fellowship with other liberty lovers like yourself, where you can enjoy a vibrant member blog that is being written by the members at BillWhittle.com, and where you can see the entire archive of all the programs that we've produced in the past. We invite you to join that membership to become a citizen producer. I've heard that phrase somewhere before.
Yes, you
but
have.
It has never meant more than it does now. So why don't you join us at BillWhittle.com, click that Become a Member link, and sign up today. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.